Up. I think we're live now. All right. Due to an unforeseen circumstance, I will be chairing the meeting and call it to order at 6:13 to consider the matters that have been duly posted in accordance with the Texas statutes for the Zoning Commission, Wednesday, June 26, 2024, at 6 o'clock p.m. Is there any preliminary matters before we go on to the first, the first real item, the substantive item, item number 2, public comments? Okay, we've called to order. We're now on item number 2, public comments. If anybody in the audience wishes to speak, now is the time to do so. I'll remind everybody that there's normally a, used to be a 1.5-minute limitation at City Council. Now it's 3, but we're gonna let you go as long as it's not an extended kind of thing. So yes.
And we will be having, for the 2 public hearings, we'll have public comment opportunities at those.
For both of them, right.
Yes.
And the other reminder is not only is brevity better than not, but also state your name and your address for the record. We are being recorded, and we need to know who's speaking on the recordings. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Randy Rosengarten, 25 Yellowtail. I'm here to speak against zoning change for the uplands. I did have a very brief statement, but since I had an extra 14 minutes, I added to it. Basically, I see no reason for this commission to act on the proposal since current zoning is in sync with the plan. That is, it can be used as a park according to our own code. The only outcome from changing the zoning to parkland from GU is to limit the city's options. And to quote Charles Young, when he argued for the plan, we all know that plans change. So why limit the options knowing that conditions change for the future where we may want to utilize the property for something other than park? It has a much broader latitude with its current zoning. And also, I think that we already have some challenges with competing projects for finances from the city, which is Upper Cougar Creek, Williamson Creek, or Barron's property, Reimagine Brody, and the Ann Galt property as park. We have plenty of park issues coming before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? All right, next speaker. Who would like to go next?
Good afternoon. I'm Helen Bessie, 795 Oakdale Drive, and I wasn't planning actually to speak on this item, but all of you know the history of the uplands, so we're not going to go into all the history of it and all the issues with it and the back and forth. I am in support of zoning at Parkland, because I think that we've waited so long for this, and by keeping it undecided, we can't really move forward. And I realize there are fundings for other projects, but it does keep it protected. And also, I'd like to remind the Zoning Commission that there is always the opportunity to change a zoning designation from parkland back to something else. That would take a vote, a majority vote of the residents of Sunset Valley. But if you think about we have new people coming in, we have old people like me that are not going to be here that much longer, and so it gives a chance for the new folks to get more involved, to know what the issues are, and to formulate an opinion of some kind. And it's going to be their parkland, or their commercial area, or whatever happens to it. So it's not like it's a done deal and it's going to be in stone and this is a forever thing. The city, the residents, who are the ones who should be making these decisions, they have an opportunity to do that when the time is right. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, any questions? No. Next speaker, please. And y'all can queue if you want, so the speaker after Councilmember Rosengarten can, there you go.
Rudy Rosengarten, 25 Yellowtail. When this came before council on January 17th, 2023, I was very vocal. I was very vocal against the open park space plan. And the reason being is because there were issues within the plan. I was told it's just a plan. We have to have a plan in order to get started, just a plan, like I wasn't committing to anything if I voted for it. And I argued again, but I don't want the uplands changed to parkland. Thoughts that I have had with residents in the community is that it is a piece of property that could one day be like your piggy bank, your savings account, something in the back just in case you needed it if the city needed finances. And there was an ad hoc committee, and that ad hoc committee had contentious discussion to where they couldn't come to a decision, and so the best decision was to do nothing and leave the property as it is. When Mayor Cardona was mayor, she decided we needed to do at least something to show action on the property, so we did some small amount of trails on the property and put benches there so people can walk on it, etc. This last Art Fest, the Art Fest committee was, the Arts Commission was allowed to use it for the children to go and build things over there. So it was part of the Arts Fest. Now, all of this does not change anything just because it has been brought to zoning to change it. When it came to council and council was asked if they wanted to pursue this and have zoning look at changing the zoning, I voted no. And I voted no once again because if you go to your land development code and it's paragraph 150.194 GUI, it says permitted uses, and it goes government buildings, schools, religious worship, parks. It's right there. We can use it as a park as it is without having to change the zoning. You have more options by leaving it zoned GUI than if you zone it parkland. So when you look at the definitions from GUI and you look at the definition for parkland, there is quite a bit of difference. Direct public access must be provided if you call it parkland. That means all the people that live on the streets will have access. And you have to have for parks and active recreation areas. So again, I don't understand why anybody would want to change this zoning when it already gives you the opportunity to do as you wish with it. The park, you can have it as a park and use it that way. I have all of my paperwork from January 17th, 2023, and all my notes of where I discussed this, and the mayor kept saying, it's just a plan. And another council member said, it's just a plan, it's just conceptual. And I told him what I didn't want. When I first got on council, I was learning, and I would sit down with the city administrator, and there was an issue in front of us, and I said, I object to this project. And he said, well, you'll have time to object later. So I waited, and then it came up before us again, and he said, you'll have time to object about that project later. And then I waited, and then the third time he said, not he, the mayor said, where were you? So I've been objecting to the uplands being zoned to parkland for a long time. And the reason being, you have more options leaving it as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Hearing none. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Zoe Treef. I'm at 1031 Sunflower. I'm speaking as a citizen, but I'm also chair of the P&E committee. And I did not prepare something ahead of time, and I'm taking Miguel's suggestion to heart about brevity. So I just wanted to say that the P&E committee has time and time again expressed a lot of excitement about moving forward with the Uplands plan. We started taking tentative steps toward exploring the Uplands plan prior to COVID, and then things changed significantly. But we'd been talking about it again. And also, the Parks and Open Space Plan, the development of the plan required a lot of community input, a lot of discussions with people in the community, and as far as I know, it's the best indicator about what the community as a whole wants. And so my personal opinion is that we should proceed with the plan eventually. Like, we would like to fulfill aspects of the plan, especially as regards to the uplands. And then I would also like to speak about the wildlife fencing. And the reason this came up in the committee is due to lots of gory stories where animals were wounded or killed as a result of encountering the fencing. So Helen is definitely the expert in that arena, but there was no opposition on the committee. Everyone was in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for this commenter? Commenter, speaker? I'll use those terms interchangeably, by the way. All right, next speaker.
My name's Burton Pearson. I live at 39 Pillow Road. I wanted to say this, just to start. The city council voted, I think there was one dissension to make this recommendation for the city to zone the uplands as parkland, and I feel like that can be considered the voice of the people to a large extent, since those are the representatives. According to the city website, one of the designated purposes of the Sunset Valley committees is to do research and to inform the city council so they can make good decisions about how to proceed on various matters. The Prairie Restoration Subcommittee of the Planning and Environmental Committee began such a research project to initiate species diversity surveys of the species utilizing the uplands. Because of the availability of volunteers, these surveys were initiated with surveys of bird species because we had the Audubon Society to help us. These bird species diversity surveys began late in the winter. Bird volunteers from the Audubon Society did extensive surveys of the bird species found on the uplands. Their surveys included species overwintering on the tract and eventually migrant bird species using the tract as a rest and refueling station during the spring migration this year. These surveys were able to find 50 species of birds using the uplands tract. Now, I didn't think the migrating was a big deal. I figured they just came through, no big deal. But the biology is very different. Birds need rest and refueling stations along their migration route, or their migration cannot be successful, and that would be devastating to the species. So even though migrating birds may stay only a day or two at a station, these stations are critical, and the surveys conducted this spring indicated that the uplands is one of these stations. One of the overwintering species is Harris's sparrow. The conservation status of Harris's sparrow is listed as declining by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Surprising to most people is that declining population size can have a devastating effect on the genetic diversity of the species. I'll give a quick example here. If we think about this coin being a gene, having two forms, a head and a tails gene, and we're going to flip it 100 times, indicating a large population, you probably are not going to lose the tail or the head gene. But if I flip it twice, there's a head, and there's a head, that's it. That eliminates the tail gene. And that occurs in all genes. It's tremendously reducing in species or genetic diversity when the population size declines. And this is happening now, probably in Harris's sparrow and in many other species. To date, many species have suffered tremendous declines in their population size. So now, with climate rapidly changing and populations losing their genetic diversity to adapt to the changes, we're headed for unbelievable problems with our very life support systems.
Okay. We can come back to this. What is the specific tie to the uplands? And try to keep your comments short.
Okay, then I'll finish up this way.
Yes.
All habitat loss is local. All degradation is local. Habitat loss is the #1 reason for the loss of species and biological problems. It's the easiest thing for us to solve. Locally, we preserve the habitats, and we basically solve the problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any questions for the speaker?
Is there not significant enough space available now? We have a significant amount of space that does exactly what I think you're saying.
Well, the problem is, we don't really, I'll explain it, give you an example. Yellowstone National Park's really big, right?
Yeah.
But there's not enough space in Yellowstone to preserve the genetic diversity of the grizzly bears there. Okay. It's a big deal. It takes years.
All right, thank you. I guess we've got Melissa left.
Are we supposed to be giving comments on both items?
You could if you want. So I will allow you come up. This is not a debate, so you get no rebuttal on anybody else's. So if you don't talk about anything you talked about before, and you don't talk about any previous speaker, you're welcome to come back and talk about the fence now. You can talk about the fence.
Okay, I do have an item that I will take before the administrator that I think is out of order. Something that happened tonight. So I do want to speak about the wildlife fencing. Brant Boozer lives on my street. I don't know if he's witnessed this or not, but every year we have issues with deer getting caught in fences. We have a lot of fences on our street. There's no places for the deer to get across, so they have to travel along the fences. If they're frightened by a car, they'll jump over anything and they'll get caught. We have spike fences on the street. Brant's fence is very wildlife friendly, so there's no issues there. But I have been there trying to get to a young deer. It was the first deer who was totally, hip was completely messed up, and that poor deer hobbled off straight to its death at some point. There was another incident where a deer got caught in the cyclone fence down the street from me, and I happened to be there. The police came. The deer was in shock, caught in the fence. The police officer wanted to shoot the deer, and I said, no, wait a minute. So I got the deer's hoof off the fence. The deer lay there for about 5 minutes and then popped up and ran off because it was in shock. And yet the police officer, he was scared to death. I could tell that he didn't want to do it, but he felt like it was his duty to shoot this deer that had been caught in a fence, and there was nothing wrong with the deer. When we started talking about this at Planning and Environmental, which was several years ago, I had a lot of photographs of deer that had been caught in fences, and it's really horrific to see the torture that they go through when they're hanging there by a hoof or their neck in a fence that has spikes on it, or the spikes come up and it's so narrow that the deer's hoof gets caught, and he's just upside down, usually with a broken leg, which means death. And this happens on Oakdale. So I wish Carolyn were here. I had no idea she was not going to be here. She has all the statistics on the number of deer, or the police department. They have the statistics on the number of deer that are impaled or caught by fences in Sunset Valley. So that's how it came before the Planning and Environmental Committee. We're not asking people to replace their fences. This is if anybody puts in a new fence, then they should comply with the city's ordinances for wildlife-friendly fencing. And if you look on the internet, there's tons of them out there that are beautiful and that will protect the deer. If someone wants to put in a new fence, they would comply with the new ordinance, or yeah, I guess it's an ordinance. And then if they need to take down their fence, like there's a family on Oakdale, they had a cyclone fence with the barbs that stick up like that, and that's what caught the other deer that I was, the two other deer that I was unfortunate enough to be around. They've taken down their fence, but in the front, but there's nothing to keep them from just putting up another fence just like that that would be so dangerous for the traffic that's trying to get across from one creek to the other on our street. There are no pathways because they're caught by fences, and if they're desperate, they jump over, and they might get caught by the fence. So I would ask the zoning commission to please consider this recommendation and give it your approval so that it could move forward to the council and have your blessing as well. Thank you.
Did the Planning and Environmental Committee come up with the exact language, or was this worked on with staff, or just Carolyn, or?
It happened so long ago, and I don't have that memory anymore.
And since this language has been written, does it correspond with the developments at the state level for use of building materials?
Commissioner, I think that we should probably relate to any discussion when we get to that item.
Okay. But I was just wondering when the date was that this was written, this language from your commission.
The committee,
That is a
golly,
good point.
it's been a
And
while.
We can, we can take it on,
Oh, was
we
it
can
this
take
year?
it
I'm
up.
sorry, I
We'll
mean,
talk about it
everything
later. I
runs
was just
together for me
curious.
nowadays, so I apologize. Yeah, so earlier this year, and I had
Okay,
all the backup.
great.
I could possibly find it again and show you the
Perfect.
pictures and show you all the examples of friendly wildlife fencing.
Oh, I get it. I'm on board.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? No, okay. Oh, quick question for Ms. Bessie.
Just a quick question. Has this been a long-term problem, or has this gotten worse over the years? I mean, this is.
Well, excuse me.
Deer's been around here for many, many years, as far as I know. Are there more deers? Is it the fences not being maintained? Is it just becoming a worse problem that now needs an answer?
As you might notice that Sunset Valley is changing. It's a different population coming in. And when new people come in, now I can only speak for Oakdale, but I did look at some fencing on Sunset Trail where new people have come in and they've immediately put up their big giant fences. One of them I think would be very harmful for a deer. But they put up the fences on Oakdale, they've put up fences. Brant's always had a fence, but then he moved across and now he has another fence. We have several newish persons who've come. They've put up fences. And then we have the older fences from the older residents, but those are also dangerous. They're not 6 feet high, but they're the ones that are the cyclone fences. And a new cyclone fence, the way that, I don't have the terminology, but if you look at a picture of a new cyclone fence, the round bar at the top is right up here, and then the little spiky things are down below of the cyclone. Over time, when a fence ages, the sagging and whatnot, those little spikes stick up over the bar. And that was the case of the ash balls. That's the case of down the street close to me, one of my neighbors. And then we had the spike fences go up as well, the newer spike fences.
So you're telling me replacement fences have become more dangerous for the deer population?
No, the city, I believe, has a ban now on barbed wire fences. They're also equally bad, and we have them out in our green belts, and the city has given me permission to remove them as I can, but one of my neighbors on Lone Oak, and he and I went and removed a lot of it, but there's still a lot out there. So there's dangerous fencing that's been there from the barbed wire. You could no longer use barbed wire, and I don't think most people would now because we don't have cows and things. that I'm aware of. But there's nothing about the other kinds of fencing that are equally dangerous to the wildlife population.
So I'm just checking for clarification. So what I hear is, and this dovetails with what Burton was telling us, as the amount of space is decreased or minimized by the proliferation of new fences.
Yes, at least
The deer have less passageways, and they're forced to make jumps or travel in areas where they come in contact with the fences, whereas prior there was other ways around these fences. Is that what I'm hearing?
yes,
Okay.
and the only one that I'm aware of that has these fences, because I'm not over in this part of town that often, is on Sunset Trail. And I believe, and I was going to ask Rudy about this, your HOA doesn't allow fencing on the street, do they? Don't you have a 50-foot setback or something like that? You know, yeah. So that in itself would help protect wildlife in that if a car's coming this way and a car's coming this way, and the deer's right in the middle, he's going to panic and he's going to go wherever he can to get away from it. In the meadows, they have 50 feet on either side of the street.
The roadway.
And so the deer could just run and get out of the way, and they're aware enough of cars, you know, they know the car's not gonna go get them in the yard. So then they're safe. Is that enough
Does that?
data?
It helps, but it still doesn't tell me specifically.
We should probably save the discussion
Yeah,
and question,
this-
and
this-
further
this-
questioning for
This
for
might-
when we get
this
to the
might be
agenda.
best. I was going to
yeah.
suggest that, because I know that Ms. Versace also had some questions on building materials and things which come up during the public hearing. This will come up during the public hearing. So if you can, stick around for that, or
Yes.
Zoe was, as the head of the committee,
No,
you'll be here for that public hearing? You don't think so? Okay.
And I could stay as well.
Somebody
And
will be here
we
then.
did look at all that, and it's all out there. I mean, all the data is out there on the internet. I had it all as part of the backup material. But again, that was a very long time ago, and
Right.
I didn't even realize this was coming up until I got the agenda item.
So for example, the statistics and things you have,
I
but you just
absolutely-
don't have them with you. Well, we believe you, but.
Well, I realize that.
Okay,
But
so,
thank you.
any other questions that can not wait for the public hearing? All right, there being none, if one of the committee members sticks around, and Melissa's signaling that she is, and Ms. Bessie will, we'll talk about it then.
Absolutely.
Okay, so,
Thank you.
thank you. Next speaker.
Melissa Gonzalez, 26 Reese. I'm in favor of the other items that the other planning environmental members have spoken to. The fencing was this, very recently, I'm pretty sure it was this year, the language, to speak to the language question that people asked about, was given to staff to fine tune, is my memory, to see if we had existing language that addressed our points. So I believe that staff looked around to come up with the language. I don't know that we saw the very final version of it, but we said these are the things that are important to us. And we did have excessive amounts of statistics that mostly Helen brought and compiled. I'm pretty sure there's a presentation of this, that there's another hearing. If there's another hearing on this, I'm pretty sure Carolyn will be back and we can get this data. But I don't have it in my head. But I will tell you that to speak to your point, that it was recent, that we did have staff input on it, that we did look around at other ordinances on fence, because I said, there's no need, I personally said, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Let's go look at the other ordinances and let's steal the language. And I'm pretty sure that's what staff did. To speak to your point, Commissioner Reitz, so there are problems with old fences because they're barbed wire and they're sagging and they're making spikes. And there's problem with new fences because there's spikes built into them, and we don't have any language about this. And so this is just, we're not trying to particularly prevent fencing in this language. We're just trying to keep it animal friendly. And that was the intention behind it. There wasn't recommendations that we would get rid of fences, that we would say this or that. It didn't go that far. All it said was, let's make them safe so we're not stabbing deer that are jumping. We know we have a lot of deer. There's nobody who lives here who doesn't know we have a lot of deer. And in terms of population diversity, so I'm going to move over to the uplands topic now and say, it matters what birds are where. So you can't say, oh, we have land, and that's going to address all these birds. Where it is matters. So when they say this particular bird is nesting in this type of underbrush, in this kind of situation, you can't change that and keep those birds. They come for that particular situation. And that's what we have on the uplands, which leads to the diversity kinds of things that Burton's talking about. Birds that I've just started seeing in this kind of situation, we have bald eagles in Sunset Valley that are nesting over on Sunset Trail. We have all kinds of red-shouldered hawks. We have all kinds of birds. When you walk around with that Merlin thing, it's astounding the amount of birds that we have. But they are specific to these particular environments. And the undergrowth that we had there in the uplands as it was. So when you're wanting to preserve the land as it is, that's what matters to keep these species, because you just say, oh, we have land and we just mow it all or something, we're not going to have those birds. So that's why things like this designation and wildlife designations and rewilding are really important if that's what our goal is. Yeah. And so that's why it matters that we do these rezonings and these protections and mowing policies and all those kinds of things. But speaking exactly to the item, that's why we want to make it Parkland. Thank you.
Well, and
Yes.
I thank you for speaking directly to the item.
Yes.
We certainly understood what Burton was telling us. You provided tie-in. But I'm thinking we'll probably come back to this during the public hearing as well.
Yeah,
As you said, you've got some information. Let's
And I'm
look at
vice
it.
chair of the committee, and I think my memory's pretty good on this, so
Okay.
thank you.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions for this speaker commenter? There being none, thank you. Mr. Belanca.
John Belanca, 3 Yellowtail. I'd like to speak for a minute about against the proposal for the zoning change. I know you're all aware of the history, kind of the subcommittee meetings, the working group meetings, the opinion polls submitted by the citizenry. All of these things, everything that I'm aware of, has resulted in like a 50-50 proposition. There was a very strong contingent that wanted the parkland. But there was an equally large population that did not want the parkland, and for various reasons. And I just might give you a couple of those reasons. One is the value of, first of all, we have a lot of, we have a number of parks. We have a lot of conservation areas and hiking trails. We have a goodly amount. But the property is valuable. I don't know. I'm going to make a guess at it, $5 to $10 million. It seems like that's, and what we kind of thought back then, and I still think, is that's a good thing to hold in your back pocket. Just in case you ever need it, you got a $5 to $10 million get out of jail free card, right? You could use that to, when somebody else considers raising taxes or having taxes, that kind of thing. Well, maybe you could sell the property. I don't know. Or maybe you could develop the property, which was a big consideration back then. I guess the big thing is our conclusion was to not do anything, to not go with the parkland, so that we could maximize our options. And options are good. I think also if you do go with the parkland, you don't know what you're going to have in future years by way of expenditures, right? You talk about a fence. You going to put a fence up? I don't know. But if you are, you're going to have to maintain it, right? I was on the budget committee for about, I don't know, 6, 7, 10 years, long time. And that was always a consideration. Like someone proposed something and, oh, gee, that's only $1 million. Okay. How about the following year? And the year after that, and the year after that, and then oh, well, that thing adds up to $3 million. Oh, okay. It's just, I know you don't want to hear anymore. I will sit down, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I am watching the clock. You've got a couple more minutes if you really want them, but,
Okay, about the, no.
and as long as we don't build a spiky fence. All right, that's the end of public comments. So we're going to item number 3, which is consider approval for the minutes from the last regular meeting, which was May 1st. And I normally would have done these in reverse order, but for some reason, they're on the agenda, 2 and 3, not 3 and 2. So here we go. Do I hear a motion on the minutes from May 1, 2024?
Motion
you
to
may
approve the
abstain.
minutes?
Okay, I've got a motion. Do I have a second? We have a second. Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hand. And it looks like we've got 3 of the 5, so they are approved. Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 4, which we're going to open the public hearing and recommendation for the recommendation on the zoning change. And I've got some questions for staff. I'm sure the rest of the commissioners do as well. But before we get into the questions that I've got and others may have, do we have a staff presentation including what's the matrix we need to meet for the zoning change in this
Sure.
particular instance?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Jerry Restoven, the Development Services Manager. As you said, item 4 is the public hearing and a possible recommendation to the City Council on a rezoning request for a property known as the Uplands Tract, which is at the southeast corner of Major Sergeant Bob Horgan Trail and US 290. Property is currently zoned GUI or Government Utility Institutional. The proposed zoning is P for parkland. The property is actually composed of 2 separate parcels that are collectively known around town as the Uplands Tract. One is the 1.129 acre tract to the west of Horgan Trail. It is also commonly known as the Triangle piece, and the other is the larger piece of the Uplands, which is the 7.654 acre tract. The city did purchase the property in 2006. As I said, the zoning is GUI. The park and open space plan, which was approved by the City Council in January of last year, did recommend rezoning of the property to parkland. In February of this year, the City Council initiated or passed a resolution initiating the zoning case that is before you today. The zoning to the west of the property is also zoned GUI. That's the Tony Berger Center. To the south is the Sunset Valley Elementary School, which is also GUI. To the east is the City of Austin, and that property is zoned both multifamily and commercial services. With regard to the criteria for passing the item today, well, actually for making a recommendation to the City Council, the findings that the City Council is required to make per the code are reduced because the case was initiated by the City Council. So instead of being there the standard 10 findings that the City Council would usually make, there are only 2 in this
That was my
particular
question,
case.
yes.
Okay. And they are that they're very similar. I'd be hard pressed to tell you what the difference between these 2 are, but I'll read them to you nonetheless. In order for a land use regulation change to be, so this is conditions for a change in zoning initiated by the City Council. In order for a land use regulation change to be approved, the council must find that the change is consistent with the applicable purpose set forth in 150.080. So that is the purpose statement for the Parkland district, which is in your backup. The second finding is that the conditions required for amendment to the general provisions of these provisions of the code, conditions required for an amendment to the general provisions of these provisions of the code. I don't know. In order for a general provision of these provisions of the code to be approved, the council must find that at a minimum, the proposed change is consistent with each of the applicable purposes set forth in 150.080. I think that is a masterpiece of lawyerly writing. I cannot tell you what it says. I cannot tell you what the difference between that and the first one, which is much clearer, but to me, they both say the same thing, which is that it must meet the purpose statement set forth in the code for the Parkland category.
Okay. So, is there anything else from staff on this? Staff's presentation, have you concluded, or were you?
No, I could really quickly read what the purpose statement for Parkland is and wrap it up.
Go ahead.
So that purpose is to provide publicly owned parcels for parks and recreation, including active and passive recreation, water quality protection, air purification, and the continuing of aesthetic open space and nature area buffering for the citizens of Sunset Bay.
Okay. Mr. Lingerfelter, do you have that language on that you can show us on the screen? The two criteria that are necessary, so that we've got something to discuss while we're discussing. And while that's going on, does any of the council, any of the commission have questions, or should I kick this off?
I have a question, but I can wait.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard tonight that there is no reason for the change, that we can do a park under its current designation. Has legal or staff developed a position on that? And if so, what is that position? Is that a true statement or not?
Yes, it is a true statement.
It is a
Yes.
true statement. Okay, so a park could go there without a zoning change,
Yes.
okay? So, I guess for one of the members of the committee, what is the benefit of the zoning change if a park could be placed there without needing a zoning change? And staff,
This issue was not,
do you-
I believe, considered by the Planning and Environmental Committee. The reason we're here today is because a resolution was passed by the city council initiating the zoning case. And so this, I think, is the first step, the first committee meeting hearing on the upland zone. Although
So the-
multiple city committees, I think, over the years have, of course, discussed the uplands
But
directly.
this, okay, so this didn't come up before then?
Before the planning, this particular item has not come before the Planning and
Okay.
Environmental Committee. Did? Okay. Oh, you about prior to the initiation?
Prior to the resolution?
Okay.
Helen, Bethany, and I both remember that there was a resolution out of it just before it went to council. So it was a recognition of P&E to council, and then council moved it to y'all.
Okay.
But there was a resolution from P&E.
So the question then remains, what is the impetus for the zoning change? For our purposes, it's
Sure.
because council said, go forth and do.
Sure.
I'm trying to get my
Your mind
brains
around why
wrapped
that
around
happened.
whether we actually need to.
I think there was a lot, there's a lot of staff time and money when people would say, there were several times when people would keep trying to consider things for that property. And it takes a lot of staff time and energy and money. There was a recent one, as I recall, where things stir up and people started to say, if we're going to make this a park, let's make it a park. And also the open space master plan. So we started designing all our parks, and just to sort of move it forward as a park, that was what it is. But there's been a frequent amount, people act like if it goes to the city, that there isn't a cost to staff time and investigation, and there is.
So the response is, yes, a park could be built there under its current zoning, but under its current zoning, so could a lot of other things, because as was pointed out tonight, it does not limit the use.
Exactly.
But that allows for people to come proposing uses to the city, in which the city staff then needs to respond to that.
Right.
Okay, I get it.
And this has happened several times in the
Yes.
course of my memory,
Yeah.
short-term memory.
Okay, so staff, do you answer anytime somebody comes up and says, here's a different proposal? Or do you need to get council approval to put resources into responding to that?
I think that any time someone approaches the city staff about an idea, we will always be willing to discuss it with them. As far as what could go on the property, if someone approached us and proposed an idea for the property, which has happened over the years, the existing zoning of GUI is also limited, by its definition, government, utility, institutional, on what could happen on the property. So it's not like the existing zoning, the property could be flipped, become a commercial project. That could not happen either. Would also need a zoning change. But designated parkland, the P zoning is another way to, I think, for the city to send a message on what its intended use of the property is. And in this case, the city owns the property. So how the property is used, because the property is owned by the city, is determined by the city. The city, of course, has to comply with the zoning. Right now, the proposed uses for the property based upon the Parks and Open Space Plan is for a park. Parks are allowed in both GUI and
Although
P zoning.
the city did try to get around the zoning when it built the police station, and we caught them and made them redo their plans, much to the city's chagrin.
A few
But
cities have been known to do as we say, not as we do.
coming back to this, trying to keep it relevant and on point. I understand what you're saying. Do any other commissioners have questions for the staff? Okay. Go ahead.
So with the zoning, if we did decide to vote in favor of parkland this evening, would, let's just say, a park outside vendor, would that preclude an outside vendor from pitching us ideas such as, we'd like to maintain a pickleball court there, or we would like to provide
No.
a pool to the,
No, the city owns the property. The zoning would restrict the use, which is one of the things the zoning does. And so what form, a future park took, that would be subject to, future discussions with the city, whether it be.
But our current parkland restrictions don't rule that out
No, not to my knowledge.
from a third party pitching us.
No, that's what's known as a concession usually, such as the Zilker train or the hot dog stand over, at Barton Springs. Those are concessions that are done on parkland with the permission of the, Parks Department, and of course, they receive money from it.
And would the city, would the council, have they discussed potentially opening this up to pitches?
Not to my knowledge, the last action taken on this by council was the approval of the Parks and Open Space Plan, which included, discussion of this parcel, but it did not get to that level of detail.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Just as a point of order, I'm also going to call up at the same time item number 5, which is the change of the future land use map. So we're talking about the zoning change and the land use map at the same time, because a lot of these discussions are relevant to both agendas. So both items are open, so if you've got something specifically on the future land use map, now's the time as well. Anything else, Commissioner Versace?
I was just wondering, in terms of the city vote, how it came down in the last survey in the Parks and Open Space Plan, if we have any numbers on that, in
So-
terms of, because I know we had massive participation, like 200 plus residents.
Correct. So there wasn't really a, do you want this on the uplands, yes or no, right? It was a lot of like open-ended questions, and what Carolyn did is kind of categorize. So there was a matrix that she created. So this, in best she could, categorizing the responses, right? And so you can see the number of responses. So farmers market, community gathering, and urban farm, which is pretty similar to what ended up being in the concept plan, got the most responses, 28. Recreational, which I think there's a few that mention commercial, but most it's just, recreational, I think meaning the city. 19 responses in favor of that. Environmental trails, 19 responses. Do nothing / keep as is, there were 15 in favor of that. Possible mixed use, commercial, community use, food trailer, 9 responses there. Sell for development, there were 16. And other, that couldn't be categorized, two responses there. Oh, sorry, actually, that's less, because I'm counting I apologize.
So if we total the amount of votes that were for pro-commercial and pro-food trailer or other leased out space, that comes to how many versus recreational and
So,
parks
yeah,
and
so
open space.
I misspoke, I apologize. 16 for like the park, 15 for,
It's three less.
yeah, it's three.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's three less.
The number you said minus three.
Yeah, so if you're saying, so you're wanting like a number, like a percentage, or like what do you?
I mean, if you
There
were
were
to
more, there
group,
were more comments in this that were in favor of a parkland or conservation type use. But
yeah, and
this is
so,
what we've seen
Right.
many times with the uplands, is a variety of responses. It's not a, you know,
A variety of responses.
Right.
No consistent utilization of the property. One particular plan that finds, here's what we want to do. Is that right? Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement, that there's generally been in, you know,
Yeah. So let's go back to, I mean, are you, is that it, or do you have a follow-up?
Well, I still have a question.
Oh,
Well, simple question.
Go ahead, go ahead.
The question is simply, this property was purchased by the city in 2006, is what you said. Is that right?
Yes.
Pardon?
Yes.
Does anybody know why the city purchased it back then?
I was not here.
Do you mind if they answer?
If, who answers?
We have two people that said they.
I believe it was for government use to build City Hall before they decided on this property.
So the purpose was not for parkland. It was specifically for having the governmental, and then the city council changed its mind. So it's never been an idea for a parkland, and that was the reason for the purchase.
No, well, not really.
Huh?
It was,
so, I mean, it was purchased, and I was not,
Yeah.
I was,
well, yeah,
and
but-
it wasn't categorized.
Right.
The purchase wasn't for X or Y. It was X and Y,
So-
and it included a bunch of different
yeah.
things.
And then there was an ad hoc committee that
But-
had a lot of people on it, and they
But-
came up with a lot of different uses.
But I see a bunch of folks standing.
Yeah.
But I think what we need to do is make sure that we are talking about the relevant points. So please minimize the Excel and bring up, what does the city need to prove, and who's doing it for the city, that this is, because we have to go by what the land development code says. This is the criteria for a zoning change. Do they meet one? Do they meet two? If they meet one and they meet two, the zoning goes. If they don't meet one and they don't meet two, the zoning cannot go, right? So let's go back to those standards. Jerry said they were very, very similar. I'm going to take a look at them. I think we all are going to take a look at them and go forward. And from now on, we're going to use this as the lodestar by which we guide the discussion, whether or not this has been met or not been met, okay? That's the plan. Anybody have a different plan? Hearing none, let's go. So we're looking at B1 and B2, is that correct, gentlemen?
Yes. So again, I find B1 and B2 to be very similar. Basically saying, does it meet the purpose statement of the parkland zoning category? And I'll read it real quick again. The purpose statement says, the purpose of P zoning is to provide publicly owned parcels for parks and recreation, including active and passive recreation, water quality protection, air purification, and the continuity of aesthetic, open space, and nature area buffering for the citizens of Sunset Valley.
Okay, but we are not talking about a change to the general provisions of the code, right? We're talking about strictly
No,
the,
this is a zoning change,
just the zoning change.
also known as a map amendment.
So B1 is the,
What are the conditions in 150.080?
that's what he just
Um,
read out.
I understand what you're saying, Miguel, but It says here, the title is conditions required for a change in zoning category initiated by the city council. You're right, it does say in order for a land use regulation change to be approved. You could take that to mean a code amendment as opposed to this, which is a map amendment.
That's
But
true.
since the header kind of says a change in zoning category, 1 and 2.
Right.
Someone could also take a zoning, a map amendment to be a land use regulation change. I think it's,
Yeah. And 080 is what he was reading out just a little
Well, I
while
was
ago.
gonna try to read it. so I could
There it is.
digest.
I have a question. Is the current future land use map reflecting this or not yet?
no, the
Not
current,
yet.
the current land use map is GUI, which is the same. It's
And,
a flum category is the same as the zoning
That's
category.
why we have.
and
item
why
number
wasn't
5.
council updated? How come council hasn't updated the future land use map prior to this meeting?
Because they have not done that. The only thing that the council has done is pass the resolution initiating the zoning change. I put the flum change on this agenda, and we'll put it on the July 16th council agenda because the flum, may precede a change in zoning, by decades, or it may precede it by 5 minutes. But you ideally would have the flum, the future land use map,
Yes.
zoning category match the zoning category. So that's why we have both items on this agenda. But there has been no change in the council of the flum category preceding the resolution being passed or today.
Okay, thank you. I mean, the way that I understand my role today is to basically execute on what other committees have voted to do and what council has requested us to do as long as it meets this criteria. And that's all we're limited to today. And we can't necessarily change the course of anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
as zoning commissioners, our job is to just make sure that it meets the criteria, and that's it.
Your job, I'd be a little broader than that. I'd say your job is to make a recommendation to the city council. And of course, the city council is the one that makes the final decision. The city council should make their decision based upon the criteria in the code. And so by default, I would say that that's, the same criteria y'all would use making
To
your
make the
recommendation.
recommendation. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Have you had an opportunity to
Digested?
digest it?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, if that's the criteria, I have heard nothing that substantiates it.
Nothing that substantiates.
Nothing that, where have I heard tonight indicating promoting public health, safety, moral, and general welfare, blah, 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 go through each one of those listing things. And I have heard nothing. All I've heard is we've got to do this. It's similar to, we're finding an answer when there's no problem. We're shooting and then aiming and loading.
I see what you're saying. The problem that I'm having with that interpretation is that the criteria says it can't be inconsistent with. It doesn't have to, in other words, the city doesn't have to substantiate, it just has to do, in a city-initiated zoning change, the city cannot contradict that. It doesn't have to substantiate that it meets that, which why I wanted to see the actual language. And let's go back to that, make sure that I'm remembering that correctly. And again, I'm always going to go back to the original language of whatever that we're supposed to be doing. Must find that the change is consistent with each of the applicable purposes, not that it,
Each of them.
each of them.
There would be the general,
That's a standard.
there would be the general purpose, and then there would be the purpose of parkland, which is the proposed zoning category to change it to. So,
Although,
which is why
I have
Jerry
a
read
question.
the
Should we
parkland
just
purpose.
read out loud the purpose in that little paragraph so that we're all very clear really quickly on, I mean, it's kind of hard to read from a distance and,
So again, Commissioner, if I could, to emphasize what Matt said, that 080, 150.080.
yes,
That's the purpose of zoning in the
Right.
city of Sunset Valley as a whole.
right,
And then we have the purpose of the Parkland District, which is, the part that I read specifically. So,
right.
the way I would look at it is you're being asked to do a change to Parkland zoning. So does it meet the Parkland zoning
But,
intent?
but again, I'm going back to the language that we have in front of us. And it doesn't, go back to that, Mr. Lingerfelter,
The 080.
and you'll see that it cites to 080.
Correct.
Not the purpose of the zoning designation that you're looking to go to.
Right.
So,
But I
for,
think that if you're trying to decide, the one is the broader statement, why do we have zoning? What's zoning supposed to do?
I
the
understand
other
that,
one
but
is-
I am gonna follow what it says. If the council doesn't like this, the council needs to change this,
Okay.
right?
The-
But this is what we have now.
Right. And then there's
And it-
also a specific question about a specific zoning category. And so I think you can.
But if you go to B1 and B2, it specifically says this is the one that we need to meet the criteria on, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense. But I would, if I were someone like Mr. Lingerfelter, make a note that that needs to be brought up and possibly changed in future versions of the land development
I'm
code.
still trying to figure out what number 2 means.
So, we're here. So this, you wanted to go
So
through
I
it.
just wanted to go through it really quickly.
Can you expand
So
that, Matt?
I just wanted to say, does it promote the public health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the residents?
It's got to be consistent with that.
Does it preserve places and areas of historical, cultural, or architectural importance? Does it lessen congestion to the street, secure safety from fire, panic, or other dangers? Does it prevent overcrowding of land, avoid undue concentration of population, maintain the environmental balance of the area, facilitate transportation, water, waste, schools, parks, and other public requirements? They've been made with reasonable consideration, among other things, to the unique character of the city and its particular suitability for the particular uses, and with a view to conserving the value of property and buildings and encouraging the most appropriate use of land throughout the community. Okay, I mean, that seems pretty clear.
I'm gonna stick my neck out there and say, while I don't see that it substantiates, I don't see where moving it to Parkland would be inconsistent with the purpose of that section.
Well, if our purpose is to make a recommendation, I find no reason to make that recommendation because nothing this does not advance that, as far as I'm concerned.
And that's different
Because
from
these-
being inconsistent with.
You know,
And I understand, I understand your point.
I mean, it's an unnecessary act. And that is, nothing is gonna advance any of that by doing this.
But it's not inconsistent.
It's almost like a double negative versus a negative.
But it's not inconsistent, is it?
But what's our purpose, though? If you're telling our purpose is to do nothing other than check the box, I find that that's a little restrictive of our duties.
I think that's how it's intended.
I don't think so. Zoning is to make recommendations.
Okay.
That's what it says
So-
there, doesn't it?
Is
So if
there,
you're
is there
telling
some
me that
sort
we
of,
have no recommendation authority, then we are no more than city staff. Check the box. Part of us should be more than just check the box. We have citizen input. What's the point of citizen input if we are limited to just, did they do and check the box correctly? That is part of our duties. You've been wonderful to make sure we always adhere to go through it, step by step. But then when it comes down to having some type of real input to the city and having a real zoning
Let's see.
commission, and we should be able to look at that and say, does this advance the ball? And
I have a
don't see
novel
it.
recommendation.
And
Huh?
I have an idea. Take it or leave it. And I'm not sure if this even would be possible, but in the state of Texas, can we or can we not put rezoning on a ballot and have an actual vote
No,
in the
No.
city?
no.
no.
Why not?
The state law doesn't allow that. State law says that the city council.
If we petition
that's
for
the
it and, no?
That's the city council, it's within the purview of the city council.
Okay.
So.
I just want to
here-
throw that out there.
And it's a good try.
I'm
It's a good, it's a
ignorant,
good,
so-
it's a good try,
Okay.
but it won't fly.
Okay.
Or at least not that I know of. We'd need legal civil penalty on it, but I'm pretty sure it's not gonna happen, and I'm getting some no's from city staff, they know.
No.
Jerry's very experienced. But let's come back to the question that was, or the substantive issue. I think when it comes to modifying the land development code, we make recommendations. And we make recommendations that are not check-the-box type recommendations to council. We did that in the May 1 meeting, where we went through and discussed what you must do in order to get certain adjustments at the Board of Adjustments. Those things shape the future of land decisions within the city for years to come. We're not a simply check-the-box commission. There are times, however, when we are. That doesn't mean that we're a check-the-box commission all the time. When there is an alcohol permit coming in, and I don't like them because they gave me a lousy burrito the last time I was at one of their other locations. If they meet the TABC standards and have everything else, I can't say, no, I don't like you. If somebody comes in for a zoning change and it's not the city, they've got to meet 10 different standards, including parking and traffic studies and things like that. And as much as we would like to see, there was that wonderful couple that came in wanting to do a childcare center across the street, but they never could get a traffic study showing that it would be a good idea to put one at Stearns and 290. You know, as much as we wanted to, because they were lovely people and had, they were, as people that were great. As a plan, it was terrible from a traffic perspective. In those instances, we have to put aside our personal views and agendas and look to see what we have been tasked to measure our changes against. That's not to say that in other instances, when we have land development code rewrites, we can shape the city in whichever way we see fit and make recommendations to the council. But in these instances, we've got a pretty limited scope. And as far as I can see, the movement to parks, whether or not it is advised, ill-advised, a good idea or bad idea, is not inconsistent with the purpose that's laid out specifically in the zoning change required for city-initiated projects. That's my view.
I respectfully disagree.
And you can.
It says right here, recommendation.
I understand.
I go through the list, can't get there.
I understand. And again, our recommendation can carry a caveat, can it not? They've met the standard, we find that they've met the standards for a zoning change,
Yeah.
but, But at least part of the commission sees it as a bad idea.
Well, of course, we would present to the council what the vote was, who voted for it, who voted against it. The commission may recommend, approval, they recommend denial, they recommend condition with approval with conditions. That'd be very unusual for Parkland zoning category. And of course, in Sunset Valley, the recommendation of the commission does carry weight with regard to how many votes are required on city council to approve it. So.
And, the zoning commission can make a recommendation that city council take a look at the conditions for, or review yeah.
There's that.
That could couple, that could go along with your.
Although we're not elected officials here, I feel a responsibility to best reflect the residents. And I don't know, I think that our survey has some gravity in this case. If the majority of residents, I tend to kind of feel like, I don't know, the majority of residents want to use it for either sports, trails, parkland, or activities. I feel a responsibility to the residents. I understand like keeping it in your back pocket as like a future piggy bank for the city to draw on, but.
So let's do this then. Go back to the purpose. That's what we need to look at. And if you or Robert can find something in that purpose that it's I see it as consistent with. I don't think it's good enough to be not advanced, but if you can find something that's inconsistent with that.
The only thing I could think of is it might not increase or conserve the value of the property, but I guess it would still hold on to its value. It's still land, and it might be more valuable.
And it could be swapped back from park to GUI.
That could always happen.
Commissioner,
Yeah.
I think the intention of the code here is, does it meet the broader reasons that we do zoning? You know what I mean? And those are,
Yeah.
some of them, maybe not all of them, are pretty specifically laid out in that 080 paragraph. I don't think that there is a requirement that in order for you to say, I recommend this zoning case, I think it's meeting every single word in that paragraph. I think is it meeting the intention of that paragraph, which talks about the broader reasons that we have zoning.
You're not gonna get me there. I'm just gonna tell you, to be honest with you, and that is, there is no concrete plan here. If the city council had shown up with here, we've gone through each one of these criteria. Here is the plan, we're gonna put in this, and this, so we got something to vote on. I can go along with it. There's nothing to vote on here. This is a solution looking for a problem.
It's a zoning change.
It's a zoning change. But normally, as we always see, zoning changes come in, first off, they have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, and then you go through the criteria like we just did. There is specific things we look at. Somebody has a plan to what to do with the property. That's what we do. We look at it, we go through check the boxes. If this. If it fails, you don't even get to go to city council. It fails here, right?
We did get a plan.
There's no plan.
Right here.
That's not a plan as far as I'm concerned. That
that
is
has
the
a
whole, all
pavilion.
I've heard is we're doing nothing. We're just making sure that nobody can do something different in the future. Well,
And
I mean,
that's-
you're satisfied with that. I am not. I find that to be unnecessarily restrictive. What's the purpose? Tell me the purpose.
The purpose, in my view, is the preservation of green space. I think there's sometimes in this world that something has value other than money, dollars, and cents. And we're losing green space throughout Central Texas, throughout the state. And I think it's important to preserve that green space, I would preserve it from any future development. I used to drive up to Highway 71 to my place at the lake. It was nothing but just beautiful grassland. You drive up there today, it's houses, all the way. Almost all the way to 281. And there's stoplights. I think it's important to preserve what green space we have and preserve it. I think it'd be a mistake to substitute at some point that value of green space for more concrete and asphalt. So, anyway.
So, and I do believe in due process and making sure that every voice is heard. But at some point, the question needs to be called, and we have reached that point. Understanding that you and I may differ in our interpretations, we've reached the point where we need to do something. So, do I hear a motion to make a recommendation on item number 4, which is a zoning change? I will then come back and ask for a recommendation or a motion on item number 5, which is to change the future land use map. So this is 4.
Yeah, I would move that we.
So moved by Mr. Harding. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Okay. The question is now, do we change the land, do we make a recommendation to the council to make the zoning change on the Uplands tract as requested by the city? All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? That's the vote, gentlemen, for purposes of the record. Okay, moving on to item number 5, changing the future land use map, which is very tied into what we just discussed, but is there anybody want to have any other discussion that doesn't pertain to the changing of the Uplands zoning, but does have to do with the changing of the future land use map? Hearing no discussion on that, do I have a second on item number 5? I mean, I'm sorry, a motion.
Okay.
Will you make,
Yeah,
you got the motion? Okay, Mr. Harding's made the motion. Do I have a second? Second. Mr. Boozer down at the end. Okay, calling the question. All in favor, raise your hand. All right. All opposed? Gentlemen, that's your 4-1, that's a 3, 4-1 vote.
Thank you. Ready for the next item?
All right, excuse me. So that is items number 4 and 5. Moving on to item number 6, which is the public hearing and recommendation to the city council on wildlife-friendly fencing. And by this, we're not talking about charging each other with eppies or sabers, but.
That's correct.
I wrote down a lot of notes.
And I know you've got questions on it, so
yeah.
I will let you ask the staff.
Okay, so we have the HB 2439, which restricts the government from municipal control of materials, building materials. So fencing is a building material, right? However, we're specifying that this is animal protection. This is a animal welfare issue. So why I take issue with this is I don't see very much language at all in this, except alluding to it at the very end, that this is for animals. And I think that in order for us to be not in a liable situation, or someone to sue us, like, why are you restricting all my building materials here? It doesn't even come up, and then it's just insinuated. In B, offense that creates a substantial risk of entrapment or impalement is prohibited. To who? An animal, a person, what, you know? And then the other issue that I have is, I mean, we could pick that one off first if you want to just go there.
That state law, I discussed this yesterday with our city attorney, still allows the city to regulate fencing. There's other portions in our city code that regulate fencing.
Okay.
That particular state law you're speaking of, the way I've seen it, affected, is by building materials for actual houses. In other words, a lot of cities had requirements, masonry requirements, that at least 3/4 or 100% of a house had to be masonry. Those requirements were not allowed any longer after
If
that
a
law.
fence is considered a structure in our city code, then it is regulated by that,
Okay. Well,
is restricted by that.
we and all the other cities I know have limitations on fencing, and I have not heard, nor has our city attorney told me, that particular law would affect our ability to regulate
Well,
fencing.
limitations on fencing is different.
Yeah, the height restrictions,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, that's.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
But
you're
the
talking
building
about the
materials specifically,
And this goes back to like when we had the big stucco drive-it debate, remember that? Where
Oh,
the
yes.
drive-it could count as stucco for purposes of putting them on the side of
but
poles.
what I would like to propose to avoid us being open to legal battles is language specific to what constitutes harmful fences for animals and clearly articulate the ordinance is to protect animals from harm in the language. And then also, my second issue with this is spiked pickets, spike bars, or other spiked decorative elements above the top horizontal rack. Fine, but like a small wooden picket fence isn't gonna be a problem to a deer, and that has a little spike at the top. So like, you know, I understand like the metal fences that are high with a spike at the top is gonna be a hazard. But, I mean, this seems really prohibitive and unnecessarily so. I think that I would send this back to maybe environmental and planning and just make sure that they're very explicit as to which types of fences are prohibited, or maybe have staff look at it.
I do see where, like, a decorative white picket around a flower garden that's 18 inches tall.
That has little spikes is
That-
not
that
gonna
would be
be,
prohibited.
yeah. But in this wording, it sounds like that would be prohibitive.
It would be.
Vertical pickets separated by greater than 4 inches, I mean, above a certain height maybe, or something like that, you know?
Yeah, because the other thing that I see is that we've got any of the following, and I would, therefore, between E and F, there should be an or. There's not an or an and, there's not a conjunction. But that makes it incredibly, you know, any one of these things, so the small decorative fence would be covered. That might not be the intent.
No.
You know, a fence that a fawn can step over, not jump left, but we've got a citizen standing, so I'm gonna ask, what is it that you'd like to address? Because normally we don't take comments. What is that?
Matt asked me if I would kind of represent, they hired me as temporary staff because there was no staff here to be here for the backup. But I just wanted, this is something I found, and may I just please share it? Okay, in 2019, a woman had a fence, and this was in Lakeway City. She had a 3-year-old child. The child went out and was playing on the fence, got his neck caught between 2 spikes, and he was climbing up on the fence. He tried to pull back, and one of the spikes went into his carotid artery, and he was dead by the time she found him. So Lakeway passed a fencing ordinance. Well, in 2023, in 2023, the city of Austin passed a wildlife-friendly fences, and the options to meet the new city of Austin requirements include flat-top fences, vertical pickets that are not spiked above the top rail must be separated by less than 2 inches or more than 9 inches, chain link fences using knuckle selvage tops, which are bent into a loop with no pointed ends. A fence may not include the following: spike pickets, spike bars, other spike decorative elements, vertical pickets above the top horizontal backer rail if the vertical pickets are separated by more than 2 inches and less than 9 inches, razor-like wire, barbed wire, which I believe we already prohibit, any fence design or feature that creates substantial risk for entrapment or impalement to animals and to children. Now, I know, they didn't, I just found this was just 2023 that this was passed, and in 2019 is when this poor child got impaled on a fence.
Right.
So all this has just happened recently, so I would like to actually withdraw, I mean, I don't know if I can, and my staff, to let us go back and ask the staff to please look at these new, this ordinance and get some of the background that's just happened. And let's come back and revisit it when we have more information. I mean, I was horrified when I just read this. So, that's my recommendation.
I wouldn't classify that as a withdrawal.
Well, but I'm not, you know, I have.
Oh, yeah, and you're not the staff.
Yeah, so,
However, I would entertain a motion to table by the zoning commission. I think the procedural mechanism is for the commission to table this, subject to being called at a future date when the staff has additional language for us to consider.
Yes, and they did also mention that the fawns get caught in those low fences just as well. So the same thing would apply to those fences, but they still have all the decorative everything that you want.
So
Up to, you know, a little one, you know, a fawn can jump over a tiny fence. But anyway, it's all in here.
So, and thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So in addition to the motion for tabling that I'm looking for, before we get to that, I want to make sure that the new language discusses that old fences don't need to be torn down. I think at least one of our commenters had that in. And this is for new construction going forward. So we've got a grandfathered situation.
So Commissioner, if I may real quick, yes, existing fencing under state law would not be subject to this ordinance, the specific requirements. It does not need specific language in the ordinance. You probably could do that if you like, but it doesn't need it.
I would put it in. Simply for the ease of use of the residents. Okay.
I don't know if this is possible, but obviously we do want to make sure that the deer aren't getting injured, and barbed wire fences are horrible, but also several of our residents aren't equipped to dispose of barbed wire fencing, and it could be quite dangerous for residents to remove it. I don't even know if there's a way to have a special day of barbed wire fence removal and
Barbed wire day.
Barbed wire day, and because I mean, who knows what to do with this stuff after you take it down? I mean, you can't exactly put it in the back of your car and bring it to the dump, right? I'm sorry.
How-
You have to approach the. So if we pass this, then the city is required to pick it up if you call for curbside pickup for barbed wire? Is what you're saying? I'm saying the public was very kindly. Okay.
Well,
Commissioners, I think the conversation needs to be recorded, so.
yeah. And
Yeah.
let's
So-
keep it relevant to.
so, yeah, I was gonna make 2 points.
Please
One,
keep
it's
it
not being
relevant,
recorded if you're down there. Second, trying to keep it relevant to this. It started, but then we kind of went off. Just as an aside, not addressing the change. That might be something for the committee to consider. A day where able-bodied volunteers with cable cutters will show up and go do this, right? And then, And again, it was just a suggestion. Okay. So, again, I think the issue at this point is tabling. Until they come back, we have a recommendation that it include, two animals and the grandfathering issue. And Mr. Boozer's got a question.
So, these heat regulations, would they be for,
Your mic is not
property
on.
line? Oh, I'm sorry. Would they be specifically for property line fencing or any fencing on the property?
If you have a recommendation, now's the time to make it while staff is thinking about the language.
So Commissioner, what I hear y'all doing is basically an indefinite postponement. You're not postponing it to a date certain. And you're
We're doing
requesting,
little work. They can go back to their committee and
They-
we hear the comments, but.
They
I
can
mean,
talk about it. Yeah,
I
but
don't
if you
see
got,
any reason to do this on our record, just to be, keep
It's-
us within our
It's gonna
scope
come
of our
back,
work.
so we'd like to,
Yeah.
collect some notes so that it's good to have some direction.
yeah, we're directing. the
Not too
committee-
much, not too much.
We're directing the committee and the staff to go forth and do, and come back to us with additional language. But the key is, do I have a motion to table until that time that language comes back?
Motion
table it
to
with,
table.
table it, or indefinite postponement with the request to have the Planning and Environmental Committee further refine the ordinance. And if you have any specific direction you would like, not direction, any specific topics you would like the PEC to recommend, I think that now would be the time, or you can, I guess, do that in an email later individually, not as a group. And we would forward that on to the Planning and Environmental Committee and say, these are the things that the Zoning Commission would like you to work further on before we bring it back to them.
And while we can certainly make recommendations, I think council members can talk to the committee or send to the committee and staff at any point their own recommendations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Need a motion to table? Yes, sir.
Already have one.
Oh, we have one? I'm sorry. So then we've got a second? Or, no, you've seconded, haven't you?
I can.
Have it be specific to animals and children.
With grandfather. Do we have a second, or do we need a second?
Yes, yes, you would. You need a vote, please.
We need a vote?
Yes.
All in favor of tabling? All right. That one's unanimous, and I think our next one's gonna be unanimous. I think the next item on the agenda, and I've lost my agenda, but I'm fairly certain, the next item is an adjournment. It is, item number 7. So, do I have a motion to adjourn? And I know, Jerry, I know we don't need this, but it's a ritual in this commission. Do I have a motion to
I
adjourn?
prefer votes. I really do.
You motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all right.
Everybody jumps. I don't know who.
Do I have a vote? All in favor of going home, say aye. We're done at 7:46.
Thank you.
When I came tonight, I had not planned to do so.
You, thank you for your involvement. Really do.